Last week on Talk SA, we looked at the looming extinction of one of Africa's treasures and asked what South Africans are doing to help solve the problem.
After the first poaching incident, she was taken to a secure coma, undergoing surgery, getting shot again, getting darted again, undergoing surgery again. And after the second poaching...
South Africa alone, please.
Our loyal viewer, Chris Katlego Rapetswa, let us know what he felt. Today on Talk SA, we give you a lesson on the law.
The problem comes in with what if the law isn't used correctly? What if it's abused?
That we don't know. That's just and that's the problem with this bill.
The Constitution says that we're an open and democratic society, but this bill goes way too far.
The introduction of a new law should ideally be to help the public. And of course, when a new law is being formulated, certain procedures need to be followed. But last year, on the 22nd of November, which will forever be known as Black Tuesday, we saw the unraveling of the idea of our democracy. And this happened when the information bill was passed amidst lots of opposition from the media sector. It was initially introduced in 2008 by State Security Minister Ronnie Kasrils. Now, the whole purpose was to protect state secrets as well as to promote transparent governance. However, it was never tabled in Parliament, and then in 2010 it was reintroduced and passed last year in November.
Nee, ek glo nie daai wet is baie goed nie, want omrede daar so baie skelmigheid wat aangaan in die regering en die mense weet nie wat dan aangaan nie. So ons gaan maar wat hulle sê en verder weet ons niks nie.
And how, Nahananda, did you think, Rona, as South Africans, we know the power we have in order to influence things that are passed in Parliament?
Few people want to say about power, but some they don't know because they are not informed, they are not told about those things. They hear in the news, no one is explaining to them what are those things meaning. So some of us knows, like national idea some of the things, but others don't know. The majority don't know, especially those in the rural areas.
I really don't know anything about the bill. What is it about?
We want to know everything. We chose them so that they can make decisions and come back to us and tell us what's happening. So they have to tell us what's happening. It's bad. We don't want the protection of people.
The reason they are secrets is because there's a massive incompetent people who actually, I don't understand how anybody can get into a governmental position without having a qualification for it.
You can imagine that if you want to go to America, you're not going to find a document that lists the whereabouts of every single nuclear warhead that America owns. Why? Because that's information that anybody can then use in order to harm the country.
Presently, though, the bill seems to be problematic, and a lot of journalists are crying out about some of the provisions in the draft. So today on Talk SA, we're going to be talking to learned people in the media and information sector about what the Protection of Information Bill is and how it affects South Africans.
It's difficult to say exactly what type of information will be classified, or I can't give too many examples because it would really be very fact specific. For example, let's say the route that the president is going to use to go from A to B, because it could be a security risk. If, for example, they know that somebody is trying to assassinate the president, then they wouldn't want anybody to know where he's going or how he's going to go there. And documents pertaining to that might be classified. As I said already, an example of the names of secret agents that work for South Africa. So your James Bond type person that works for South Africa, because we do have such people, their names would be classified because nobody's supposed to know who they are. Information that relates to, perhaps, I'm speculating now, information about where South Africa's weapons are kept. Maybe if we have nuclear armaments or something like that, the location of that material would not be something that everybody must get to know about. So it might be classified. That type of information is the type of information that should be classified with such legislation. And of course, there's nothing wrong with such classification. But that's not what people have been complaining about.
Nee, ek dink dit is 'n goeie ding as hulle weet waar, jy weet, as hulle sulke dinge beskerm. Maar wat regtig aangaan wat die sal ek sê wat die publiek aangaan in Suid-Afrika, dink ek moet hulle die publiek vertel, want hulle vertel jou nie alles nie.
At the moment in South Africa, we have a piece of legislation called the Protection of Information Act of 1982. That act is the apartheid legislation that deals with secret information held by the government, secret places where you're not allowed to go if you're not authorized to do so, etc., etc. And that act is obviously completely unconstitutional, and it's very, very harsh because it was drafted, during apartheid, and it was meant to ensure that the apartheid regime would continue in the way that it was. So it's a very harsh piece of legislation, and the government was trying to reform that law. Every piece of information that is classified is supposed to be marked with the appropriate classification level. So it really should look like the way it looks in the movies, with confidential, secret, or top secret. Well, not exactly like that, but you get what I mean. It should be marked so that you see on the face of the document that it's classified. It should be like that. As to whether it will be like that or not, we don't know, but that's what the law envisages. I don't think that the level of opposition, or rather the level of what people are saying is going to happen, is what's going to happen, because unfortunately, some people have created the impression that every piece of information in South Africa is going to be classified. We will never know anything that happens in government from now onwards, and I don't think that that's realistic.
That's where this bill matters then, because if it's passed in its current form, then we will see an even smaller, or we will see a diminishing of access to the media and public debate, particularly around political sensitive or potentially politically sensitive issues.
The problem comes in with what if the law isn't used correctly? What if it's abused? Because there is a certain amount of scope for abuse. And that's where the problem comes in, that if it is abused, there's no defense. So a whistleblower who finds out that actually this information has been hidden from the public when it shouldn't have been, or a journalist for that matter who gets handed a brown envelope by a whistleblower, will not be allowed to publish that. And so that's why people are so worried. But the debate really is how much information should be restricted, and under what circumstances should you be able to breach that restriction by saying, actually, I disagree with the government. This is information that everybody should know. And if I disagree, let me publish that information and let the court decide between us who's wrong and right. And that's what this law doesn't allow. The law says if the government has decided to classify something, as a citizen, you are never entitled to decide that you disagree with that and to disclose the information no matter what the reason is. So you don't get your day in court where the court can then decide, actually, you were right and the government was wrong, and it wasn't the public interest.
After the break on Talk SA, we speak to those who will be immediately affected if this bill is passed.
Being a journalist and being in the media is all about being a watchdog and holding those in the public house accountable and responsible.
Today on Talk SA, we're going to show you, South Africa, just how powerful you are as a public. We're also going to illustrate how one decision can affect such a large number of people. We went and spoke to a representative of the University of Johannesburg, as well as some fresh media graduates, about the Protection of Information Bill and how they think it's going to affect their performance as information disseminators.
Any state agency, government department, even a parastatal and your local municipality can classify public information as secret. The disclosure, even of some information which is not formally classified, can land citizens in jail. This will lead to self-censorship and negatively impact free speech. Whistleblowers and journalists could face more time in prison than officials who deliberately conceal public information that should be disclosed.
I think this bill is unusual because it gives sort of an unlicensed rights to any politician or any government official to classify whatever document as a classified document or as classified information.
So do you guys know what the Protection of Information Bill is?
Basically that some information is going to be classified and people can't have access to it. Like they'll have laws that will restrict people having certain information. So if I, as a journalist, have information that is not supposed to be in my hands, I could really end up in trouble.
I just think it's a way to not have our leaders be held accountable. You know what I mean? They want to basically control the flow and output of information, and basically control what people need to know. You know what I mean? And I think in a democracy, it's really not a way forward. Basically, you know, I think we basically just going back to an autocratic government. You know, and that meaning basically a one-party dictatorship.
And you, Hastings, do you agree?
To an extent, I agree with, just adding on to what they're saying. I think it's just a very strategic measure by our government to sort of like silence journalists and the press from actually performing the watchdog role in society. So in a way, I think maybe it's because they have a lot to hide. That's why they don't want us knowing what they get up to.
But what about things that should remain secret? Is there nothing that should remain secret? Like someone mentioned the secret agents. What about that?
Secret agents, I think as a journalist, you know, you never, the very same way a lady doesn't reveal her beauty secrets, we don't reveal our sources. And at the same time, I think because we operate within a global setup, I think for international relations, it makes sense why we should have certain things not splashed all over the media, because it's not good for the public relations of South Africa. I mean, we're trying to get international investors, but if ever we have ministers' incompetence and whatnot being all over the space at the same time, it's like we're working against what we're trying to achieve.
That we don't know. That's just and that's the problem with this bill, is that any information can at any time be classified as classified or secret then. With a secrecy stamp on it, and that's the problem with this bill, is that we don't know.
How it was reported, it was like portrayed in a way that only the media is going to be affected, not that even everyone, even at the grassroots level, is going to be affected by the bill. So that's the extent to which I say the media failed. But at the same time, I feel South Africans decide when they are affected by things. They decide when to pay attention to things. This is something I sometimes call the apartheid hangover.
So as a journalist, I feel that I should be able to know what I can actually publish and get out there to the people, and what I should actually keep in order to protect everyone else. Because the difference between public interest and just going all over the place and saying things that you shouldn't be saying.
So what exactly is public interest?
The public interest is obviously something that cuts to the core of journalism and how we do conduct journalism, how we publish information as journalists. The problem, though, with the idea is of a public interest clause is that no one can define the public interest. The public interest will always be defined contextually for each story that we publish. So the public interest is defined in morning meetings, in editorial meetings. It's defined by us as journalists when we choose to pursue a story or not to pursue a story. So you can never really put in a public interest clause, because no one can, strictly speaking, define what's in the public interest at any one point in time. It's very contextually set, and that is problematic with this bill as well.
Certainly there is information that not so much that the public needs to be protected from, but that needs to remain confidential. You know, for example, like our arms, where our weapons are kept, or whatever. There's, you know.
So then the protection of information bill is a good thing, because we need to somehow be disciplined, and somehow we need to, because there are irresponsible journalists out there. What do you think, Monde?
That in its own, I can understand them wanting there to be responsibility on journalists' part in terms of revealing certain information, but then the state is the one who decides what is national interest. So how do they then decide what is national interest? Because then they can just say, okay, no, we are spending hefty amounts of money and it's actually not in the national interest, but hey, something else is in national interest, like as if they are the ones who roll the dice. And it's a democracy, and the people are the ones who are meant to rule, you know what I mean, at the end of the day, because these people were put in place by votes, and the votes actually give people power to information, to expression, and you know, to basically know how the country is being run.
So Hastings, njengomuntu osanda kuqala ukusebenza usuqedile ukufunda, you're now working as an entertainment journalist. What stories are important for you to tell?
It comes down to the question of public interest, if the story is in the public interest. Basically, era gore dilo tse diregago mo tikologong ya rena tse di affecta go setšhaba di tshwanetse di tsebiwe, apart from ntwa gore media is just being voyeuristic and trying to get into personal issues tsa di public figures. Sure, we understand gore being a journalist and being in the media is all about being a watchdog and holding those in public's in the public house accountable and responsible, because they have a certain responsibility towards society. For instance, if a certain minister is getting, you know, down and dirty with a certain somebody, and in the process they're spending taxpayers' money to do that, then I think it's in the public interest and I should be allowed to talk about it.
What we're actually discussing here is the idea of transparency. And when we talk about transparency in government and transparency in society, we have to juxtapose that. We have to put it in opposition to what we had pre-1994. When there was no openness, where there was no idea, general idea in society about accountability, that public officials can be scrutinized, that illegal deals or corruption in government can be scrutinized and open up for all of us to have some kind of an insight into. And of course, if this particular bill now, the Protection of State Information Bill, is passed, we're going to go back to a society where there's no openness, where we cannot ask questions to our politicians about what's happening in government. And that's what is at stake here, and that's the dangers, the real dangers for you and me and everyone listening to this show today. This is what we should be very, very worried about.
After the break on Talk SA, the Right to Know campaign says it ain't over till the Fed lady sings.
Well, the Right to Know campaign is fundamentally an access to information campaign. The secrecy bill obviously is the most immediate target of that.
Dale McKinley and the Right to Know campaign have since 2010 been doing everything they can in order to mobilize the public to protest against the institution of the Protection of Information Bill. The bill was passed by a majority of the members in Parliament. However, the Right to Know campaign is still going strong and still trying to show government how unhappy they are. See why.
Well, the Right to Know campaign is fundamentally an access to information campaign. The secrecy bill obviously is the most immediate target of that. But beyond the secrecy bill, what we are really about is to ensure that the citizenry of this country is able to exercise their rights to access to information as contained in the Constitution. Parallel to that, obviously, is the right of freedom of expression. Because the two don't go without each other. So we fight on those two fronts. We struggle on those two fronts to realize the constitutional rights, and anything that is in the way, so to speak, or is preventing that, we're going to struggle against that, such as the secrecy bill, and also making sure that the Promotion of Access to Information Act, which is another piece of legislation, is properly implemented.
Of course, we wish that we had more grassroots movements who could really gather how people on the ground feel about these particular issues, and also educate a lot of people who don't have access to these debates. And let's face it, access to the media is a huge problem in South Africa. A lot of people don't have access to particularly the print media.
I think the macro reason, in other words, the broader reason that we're against the secrecy bill, is that it takes us backwards as a country. We are a country that, in the terms of the Constitution, says that we're an open and democratic society. Nobody is arguing that we don't need a piece of legislation to protect some information. But we certainly, this bill goes way too far, and it's unconstitutional, unfortunately. And even though it has improved quite substantially since it was first introduced, we still believe it has a long way to go. Information is the lifeblood of any democracy. Without information, we can't do many things. It doesn't, and I think it's very important to point out that this is not simply about the media. The media is one aspect of this, but it's about ordinary citizens. Let me give you an example. There are many, many communities over the last several years that have been going out onto the streets and showing their frustration with service delivery and basic services. But a lot of the reason why people are frustrated is because they don't know what's going on. They don't know what their local councils are doing. They don't know how the budgets are being spent. They don't know who's getting the tenders. They don't know any of this information. And without that information, you cannot be informed. And you cannot be an active participant in the decisions that affect your life. So if we have this bill, or if we had had it previously, we'd have had a lot more of a closed society where only a few individuals and elites, political and otherwise, are the ones that basically know what's going on. And that's a truncated democracy. That's only half a democracy. So essentially it creates a society of secrets. It also creates a society where there's a fear of speaking out, where there's a fear of possessing information because you think you might be criminalized and end up in jail for that. So there's an air of an aura of intimidation, I think, and fear, a chill that comes over us with this bill, where people are always looking over their back and wondering what's going on or who's got what, and that's not healthy. We need to be much more open about the information we possess and the information we distribute.
The secrecy bill basically is just saying, screw the Constitution, and we just want to, we're writing our own new Constitution and our own new black book, So basically, I hope that the Constitutional Court sets this bill aside, but with the ruling party as prevalent as they are in favor of this bill, it might actually see the light of day. So
this issue of information affects everyone, from the housewife to the mechanic to the CEO to the teacher to the student. And so it's incumbent, I think, upon everybody to join this debate, to become active in this debate, and to let their voice be heard.
Your options for the Nation Builder of the Week this week are Austrabia, Ilva, and Dale. It has been amazingly informative and helpful to find out from you, our viewers, what you want to see on Talk SA. Let us know now what you want and need. Keep talking, South Africa. Next week on Talk SA, we take a look at an age-old tradition that has found its way to the urban city settlements. Keep talking, South Africa.
In 1961, the first and only elected Prime Minister of the Congo Republic, Patrice Lumumba, was assassinated just a few months after the Congo Republic gained its independence from Belgium. Now, his killing was kept a secret for several years, and then it was later alleged that the Belgian government, the Eisenhower administration, as well as the CIA, all had something to do with it. In 1988, Percy Qoboza passed away on his 50th birthday after a short illness. Qoboza was mainly known for his barrage of criticism against the apartheid regime, especially after the June 16 uprising. At the time of his death, he was the editor of weekly newspaper City Press. Well, that's all from us this week. Remember to keep talking, SA. We'll see you next time.